soon announce his innovation and science agenda. This is a major moment for Malcolm Turnbull. Innovation is one of his key talking points that we've heard over the last couple of months. There have been journalists in a lockup for the last hour and a half or so. One of those journalists is our political editor, Chris Uhlmann, and he joins us now. Chris, just take us through some of the elements of this program.
Well, welcome to the ideas boom, Joe, is the thing that the natty slogan on the front of this innovation statement, and it's broken up really into four different parts where the government wants to see a cultural change. It starts with the words of the Prime Minister saying there's never been a more exciting time to be an Australian. And what it's trying to do is to have cultural change both within business and in Australian society and education and government to try and make sure that they can unlock what the government sees are the jobs of the future. It's split up under four different headings, which are culture and capital, collaboration, talent and skills, and the government acting as an exemplar. Some of the more interesting stuff perhaps in culture and capital has to do with changing the laws to encourage risk in business and to also allow them to be able to deduct or get some offsets. So you're encouraging people in by getting capital into small businesses and medium-sized businesses that want to work in this area, and you're also going to be relaxing some of the bankruptcy laws to make sure if people do take those risks, then they won't be unduly penalised for it. So there'll be some tax offsets involved in that. The Prime Minister, I'm sure, will go through that in more detail when he steps up to the podium in just a moment. But there'll also be a relaxation of the bankruptcy laws. Collaboration, the government wants to make sure that more university funding is directed towards things which are business friendly. It's going to change some of the ways that that works. On talent and skills, it wants to make sure that students embrace coding. Again, that's something that the Labor Party has been speaking about, and get involved in science and technology and engineering and maths, encouraging those sorts of things, and also getting more entrepreneurs here by having an entrepreneur's visa. And finally, the government acting as an exemplar. It spends about $5 billion a year on research, so it's wanting to make sure that it can get businesses involved in that, small and medium businesses.
And the CSIRO will be a big winner out of this.
It will, but don't forget, Joe, the CSIRO has been a big loser under the last two budgets. So if you rewind to the first coalition budget, it lost about $114 million over the following 4 years. In fact, all of science and technology and research lost about $400 million in the first Abbott government budget. So the money which is being reallocated is really a replacement for some of the money that was lost. And again, these are the sorts of things that the Prime Minister will no doubt be questioned about. It's a $1 billion project this is the government's putting forward, but again, some of that money is being rebadged and reallocated into this package.
And the fact that this is all happening at the CSIRO and there's extra money in there for the CSIRO stands in stark contrast to the approach from Tony Abbott.
Well, this really, from the Prime Minister, is meant to be a break with the era, the more austere time of the Abbott government. Of course, the Abbott government would say that it had to try and fix the budget, which was in disrepair, and it went about doing that by cutting a lot of different government funding, nips and tucks all over the government. But Malcolm Turnbull's seeing himself as being a quantitatively different Prime Minister, and this is really his first big statement on the kind of government that he intends to be. And innovation, risk, agility, all the words that he's been using since he became Prime Minister are incorporated in this statement. If you like, this is a totem of the kind of government that Malcolm Turnbull believes that he runs.
Yeah, and Chris, just on another topic as we wait for the Prime Minister to step up for this announcement, and alongside him I think there is going to be the Industry Minister, Christopher Pyne. But today we had the Grattan Institute come out with a report, another one of these analytical bodies talking about the possibility of a GST, and that is another policy area where it looks like Malcolm Turnbull intends to make a significant difference.
And he's allowed that tax debate to run. At some stage he's going to have to close that off, and that stage will be sometime early next year when the government delivers its green paper on taxation and starts to define the limits of that debate. And I think there are those in government who believe that they shouldn't allow this GST debate to run much longer. Malcolm Turnbull has been prepared to be as good as his word, as he says in this innovation statement, and to encourage risk, but I think that will be shut down sometime in the early part of next year. Don't forget, there's also an election next year. These ideas will have to have a little bit more meat on the bones.
And Chris, just one other challenge that popped up for the Prime Minister at the end of the last week, which was a bit of a messy week for Malcolm Turnbull, who had a pretty sweet run up until then. We had the situation with...
And I think, Joe, we are just beginning to see some movement with the Prime Minister, I'm told, heading towards the podium.
Right, OK. Well, let's go there now then. Thanks a lot for that, Chris. So this is the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, and Industry Minister, Christopher Pyne, stepping up for this major announcement on innovation.
Right. Good afternoon. I'm here with my good friend and colleague, the Minister for Industry. The mining boom, the mining construction boom has been great for Australia. It has driven growth in incomes. But, as we've seen, the mining boom inevitably has receded. What is going to drive Australian prosperity in the years ahead? How does our economy transition? The agenda is going to help create the modern, dynamic, 21st century economy Australia needs. Our fundamentals are strong. We're in our 25th year of but we need new sources of growth if we're to maintain our high standard of living, high wages and generous social welfare safety net. Although there are challenges, there has never been a better time to start and grow a business from Australia, which can now compete for customers located anywhere in the world. We are on the doorstep of Asia, the world's economic engine room, and our new trade agreements with China, Japan and Korea are opening up more doors in Asia for our business. There has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian business. There have never been more opportunities on the horizon.
OK, unfortunately we've got a few issues with this link to the CSIRO. We'll stick with it for the moment. This major announcement by the Prime Minister.
To entry for Australian businesses, no matter where they are located, right across Australia, they can sell their products and services to just about every corner of the globe. Our universities, our research organisations like the CSIRO, where we are today, and our workforce are world class. But Australia is falling behind when it comes to commercialising good ideas and collaborating with industry. Australia consistently ranks last or second last among OECD countries for business research collaboration. Increasing collaboration between businesses, universities and the research sector is absolutely critical for our businesses to remain competitive. To commercialise an idea, a great invention, a great innovation, a great piece of research, and then grow it into new sources of revenue, new jobs, new opportunities, new industries. Companies that embrace innovation, that are agile and prepared to approach change confidently and with a sense of optimism are more competitive, more able to grow market share and more likely to increase their employment. More jobs, more growth. That is the focus of my government. And we are absolutely committed to ensuring that our students have the skills to find high-wage and rewarding jobs, regardless of their qualifications or career path. We're going to do this by promoting coding and computing in schools to ensure our students have the problem-solving and critical reasoning skills for the jobs of the future. We cannot future-proof ourselves from change, nor should we seek to do so.
OK, so still having a few issues with this link to Canberra. We're going to stick with this as much as possible because it's a major announcement from the Prime Minister on innovation. This is from the CSIRO offices there. We know while we're kind of...
Entrepreneurship and risk-taking by focusing on 4 key areas. First, culture and capital, embracing risk and incentivising early-stage investment in startups. You will see in this package there will be new incentives, new drivers to ensure that Australians with new business ideas, with new With new enterprises, we'll be able better to find the capital that gets them started. And you know...
Okay, so the Prime Minister there just going into the first area there of this innovation announcement, talking about the new incentives to ensure those financing new enterprises are able to get them off the ground. We heard from our political editor, Chris Uhlmann, a little earlier about some of the elements of this. I might just go through some of them while we hopefully get this link back to the Prime Minister's address to the CSIRO there. Some of those elements include $106 million in tax incentives for what they describe as angel investors, and those incentives include a 10% tax offset for new early-stage venture capital partnerships worth less than $50 million. Larger investors would be able to obtain a 20% tax offset capped at $200,000 per investor per year, and a 10-year exemption on capital gains tax if the investment is held for longer than 3 years. Some other elements as we work to re-establish that link with Canberra is tens of millions of dollars for the CSIRO, and our political editor Chris Uhlmann was making the point there that a lot of funding and jobs had gone from the CSIRO over the last 2 or 3 years or so, and so under this plan, Malcolm Turnbull plans to turn that around, and there'll be hundreds of millions of dollars extra for the CSIRO. So unfortunately, it looks like that link just isn't reliable enough at the moment, but we'll bring you more details of that announcement when we're able to. A Brisbane man who fought with a Kurdish group in Syria against Islamic State is back home and for now a free man. Ashley Dybel flew into Brisbane this morning after leaving to join a Kurdish military campaign against Islamic State in May. He was questioned by Australian Federal Police in Melbourne last night but was released without charge pending further inquiry. His mother Julia Dybel says she's thrilled to have her son home for Christmas.
Feeling really good because I know that all the mines, if you follow him on Facebook, you know the mines that they dismantle. So even though I'm proud of him and what he's done, he's safe now at home, and it comforts us that the Australian government also sees him as a hero and that he's done good work. And
there's no charges laid at this point in time, so it doesn't get much better than that.
So he had a couple of hours under questioning with the
AFP? He was with them for a few hours. He was questioned, obviously. He was released without charge, and so we've brought him home on the first plane out of Melbourne today.
That's what you've been campaigning for. Why was it so important that he wasn't prosecuted under the Foreign Fighters Law?
Well, I think if you look at how the Foreign Fighter Bill is outlined, you're either a foreign fighter or you're with ISIS. I mean, the two aren't the same. But the way the current law is today, it's the same, and it's not. It's just ridiculous law.
Would you like to see it changed?
It has to be changed. It has to be changed. I mean, how can you have evil and good and say it's the same thing? It's not. It's not the same.
And today it's not only for Ashley, but Reece Harding,
Ashley Johnson.
So to me, now it's cleared their names as well, and they're heroes in our books, in everyone's books. What do you think?
Homicide detectives are scouring a southwestern Sydney neighbourhood where a man was fatally stabbed. Initial investigations suggest he was stabbed during a fight with a group of men at Fairfield East around 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. After reports of loud shouting, residents rushed to the 35-year-old victim, who was found bleeding heavily on Belmore Street. He was treated by paramedics at the scene but later died in Liverpool Hospital. A crime scene has been established and anyone with information is urged to contact police.
There was a man on the floor over there. He was bleeding badly, and I went over, held a plastic actually against the wound because he was bleeding profusely. So, yeah, it was horrific, to be honest. Yeah.
Victorian Construction Union officials John Setka and Sean Reardon will face court tomorrow, charged with blackmail. The charges were laid after an investigation by a joint police task force examining matters arising from the Royal Commission into Trade Union corruption. The union says the men will plead not guilty. Reporter Stephanie Anderson has more.
The Victorian State Secretary of the Construction, Forestry, Mining and Energy Union, John Setka, and his assistant, Sean Reardon, have each been charged with one count of blackmail. They were arrested at the weekend and the charges were laid. We don't know exactly yet what they relate to, but because of the Royal Commission into Trade Union Corruption, we have a fairly good idea because of some of the evidence which has come up. It's alleged that the union threatened a concrete company and said that if they continued to supply concrete to one...
OK, we'll just interrupt there, but it looks like we've got that link back now to Canberra and the Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull with his innovation announcement.
Nation and inspired, led, incentivised, we will have a very long ideas boom in the 21st century.
Here. Well said. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. And firstly, on behalf of the Cabinet and the party, can I thank the Prime Minister for creating a situation where we have a whole-of-government approach to innovation and science. Soon after being made the Minister for Industry, Innovation and Science, we convened a task force which brought together 9 different government departments, 11 different ministers, and determined what could be done to move the Australian economy from an old economic model to a new economic model. That was because of the inspiring leadership.
OK, unfortunately, it looks like we've lost that link once again. Let's try another line.
It is a very comprehensive statement. It covers over 24 different measures, as large as a new CSIRO innovation fund, a biomedical translation fund, a new compact or partnership, if you like, between government and universities and business around research development at universities. There are many different aspects to this. Landing pads overseas, international collaboration, support for incubators, visa changes. The Prime Minister has touched on many of them. But overall, they are designed to bring together all those in Australia who recognise that the future for our economy is in high-tech, advanced manufacturing, the way we use data, and we cover every aspect of that in this particular agenda that's been announced today. And we're particularly focusing on start-ups, on small and medium enterprises, on regional Australia, whether it's in agriculture or tourism or mining. We are using all the different parts of our economy to drive jobs and to drive growth, because that's what the Australian public are looking for. We'll always deal with all the other issues that governments have to deal with, but this is an agenda that is about jobs, it's about growth, it's about the future of the Australian economy. I won't go through all the measures, there are many of them in the document which will be reported in the coming days, but obviously we're very happy to answer any questions that people might have.
Prime Minister, why is there only $9 million allocated in this financial year when it's so important?
$9 million for which particular measure?
Well, because it's the bulk of the measures begin from the 1st of July 2016. Yeah. That's right. That's the reason.
The CSIRO $200 million on the biomedical fund. It says they're not off the bottom line to explain how that works. And the funding for nickel, the restored funding for nickel, is that part of the CSIRO fund or is that separate?
Well, there is a $75 million allocation to Data 61. In which they will do a number of different measures. One of those will be to establish the relationship between government and business in terms of the $5 billion ICT expenditure each year by government and the wider $50 billion procurement by government. So the DTO will be asked to establish a digital marketplace where small and medium enterprises put up on this digital marketplace what they are offering, and the public service and government will be able to access that and say we can use those particular services. Data 61 will be doing something different, which will be saying what government wants to do and asking for support from business, and that is in addition to the money that is being allocated to the CSIRO Innovation Fund, which is $200 million, made up of the receipts from the Wi-Fi inventions of the CSIRO, a combination of private sector support and a direct injection of funds from the Commonwealth, which will be all in the table at the back of the glossy document. The reason why they don't show up as the budget bottom line is because they are a combination of taking equity and supporting investments that will be made by the CSIRO and the Biomedical Translation Fund. So they're not direct grants. They will be dealt with. Of course, if they make a loss, they'll show up on the budget bottom line as a loss. If they make a profit, they'll show up as revenue to government. But the actual investments are not grants to the CSIRO or to the new Biomedical Translation Fund.
So with the entrepreneur's visa, is there a cap on how many people will be approved on a year?
No. The answer is no. We have not set a cap. I mean it would be open to us to do so in the light of experience. Can I say the more high quality, effective, productive, enterprising entrepreneurs we can attract, the better. Because they drive jobs. They will create. Entrepreneurs create jobs. Any new business. I mean, this is why we're doing so much to encourage new businesses, whether it's through the entrepreneur's visa, or by reason of the very generous tax offsets and capital gains tax exemptions for investing in early stage ventures. Very, very substantial incentives. Because one of the things we've learnt whether from life's experience or from the experience in other countries, as I was saying earlier, that even if you start a new venture, a new business, and let's say it goes well for a while and then for whatever reason it doesn't succeed, you may have lost some money, your investors may have lost some money, but the overall economy massively benefits because you are wiser, your employees are wiser, your investors are wiser, everyone's learnt something and the ecosystem benefits. That's why cultural change is so important. We've got to be prepared to have a go and be more prepared to embrace risk and experimentation. And it goes with this package too. Can I tell you? Every change that we make here, every step that we take with this, we are going to examine in the future and see how it's performed. And those things that do well, we'll do more of. And those things that do not do so well, we'll do less of, and we may do something else. This is not a one-off announcement. This is not the first and last word of this government on innovation. This is an absolutely critical theme of our administration to ensure that we are always driving innovation, because I promise you that is the future. That is our future. It's the future for our jobs and ours, our children, our grandchildren. Innovation is a big cultural measure. It's something that we need to be better in Australia and right across the board. And there's a lot of levers being pulled here, but there may well be more to come. There will be more to come, I have no doubt. David.
On those early stage tax offsets that you've announced, who are you targeting that at? Who do you expect this is going to be attractive to, and what sort of take-up are you expecting? I'm careful about the budgeting on this, but what sort of take-up are you expecting?
Well, let's look at the first one. So, for example, this is the tax incentive for very early stage investors. So this is a business that is in an innovative industry, innovative sector. It's incorporated during the last 3 years. It's not listed on any stock exchange. It has expenditure of less than $1 million and income of less than $200,000. So it's an early stage startup. So what we are proposing here is that if you invest in that, you will get a 20% tax offset. That means that up to $200,000 per year. So if you invested, say you invested the full $1 million, then you would have $200,000 off your tax bill from obviously assessed on your other income. So that's a very real incentive for you to back that new business. And in the future, if you hold your investment for 3 years or more and you sell out of it and make a gain, which we obviously hope you do, then you would be exempt from capital gains tax. Now, who is that going to incentivise? Well, pretty much any investor. But it sends a big signal as well. See, it sends a signal of confidence in the early stage startup sector, and it's this will drive substantial new investment.
Just looking at that page, the breakdown of how much money we're spending, on Paul's point, I mean, some of them aren't really a lot of money. Is that because the government doesn't think innovation costs a lot, or is it a sign of the economic times? And how do you plan to pay for it?
Well, I think you'll find that a lot of the changes that we can do immediately aren't costly, but they're very significant changes to the way we'll be approaching things like tax losses and the intangible asset depreciation. Now, they might not have large amounts of money attached to them as big ticket items, unlike, for example, the investments in the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure Scheme, which is $1.5 billion over 10 years, or the synchrotron investment or the square kilometre array investment. But they are cultural changes that will have an impact in the short term and into the future. Now, they might not have big ticket items attached to them as new expenditures, but they might well have an impact on government revenues into the future. And I think some of them you'll find have got an asterisk saying these are almost impossible to quantify until we see what impact they have in the economy. So we're not actually looking for a big spending items, we're looking for the change to the culture in our economy, and that's what that reflects. But over time, of course, we are able to see how some of the other measures will increase spending.
Can I just flesh this out a little bit? If you do, the initiative relating to company losses is very significant. At the moment, to be able to take advantage of your tax losses, past losses, and offset them against income in the future, you either have to have continuing ownership or you have to have the same business. You have to be conducting, essentially precisely the same business. Now, obviously, new companies are always hungry for capital, so they're always bringing in new investors. So they invariably fail the same ownership test. The same business test constricts them to precisely what they were doing. Now, in other countries, and this is again, we have looked very widely at what's been done elsewhere. A test of predominantly similar business has been used, and what that means is, again, that if you've started your company, you've got one narrow application, which was fine. You thought that was going to hit the mark, hasn't worked out quite as you expected. Your investors still have faith in you. Other people come in, so your ownership has changed, and you want to branch out into another area. You're using similar technology or technology that's been derived from what you've built, but you're moving into another line of business that's related. You would currently fail the same business test. You would pass the predominantly similar business test, so you can then continue to use the losses that you've racked up against your income in the future. So again, this is tailored. This may seem like a small change, but it actually will be very significant in terms of supporting that innovation culture, of entrepreneurship.
I'd also refer you to the insolvency reforms.
Yes.
Now, they might not be a big ticket item of government spending, but not everything has to actually have a big ticket item attached to it to be a very important measure. But the insolvency laws will drive economic activity and keep businesses in business that should be staying in business over the medium term. They might not show up as a massive government expenditure, but they'll have a real impact in terms of driving jobs and growth in the economy.
Just Laura, please.
You talked about risk-taking, and in some ways there are a lot of risks in this for government. I mean, they're not big-ticket items, but there is a history of risk attached to giving upfront tax deductions to particular...
Well, what is the risk?
Well, that people start to rort them, for example, film schemes and things like that. And I've noticed that in the 20% scheme, you've still got to decide what the eligible business criteria will be. How heavily have you workshopped or tested this, or fire tested these as possible, rorts in the future?
Well, let me make two responses here. We obviously have a highly developed, concept of the type of businesses we're talking about, but we will develop the final definition collaboratively with the industry, and in particular with the advice of Innovation and Science Australia. So, and it's important to make sure you get that right because often the devil is in the detail. But let me just say, Laura, I want to pick up on something you said about there are risks for government. You know something? There are risks for everybody. And we've got to be prepared to take risks. And that is why one of the aspects of the political paradigm I'm seeking to change is the old politics where politicians felt that they had to guarantee that every policy would work. They had to sort of water everything down so there was no element of risk. Let me tell you, I'm not guaranteeing that all of these policies will be as successful as we hope they will be. I'm very confident about it because we've worked very hard on it. We've had a great team. We've had a lot of good collaboration. But, you know, if some of these policies are not as successful as we like, we will change them and we will learn from them because that is what a 21st century government has got to be. It has got to be as agile as the start-up businesses it seeks to inspire.
Left the $3 billion R&D tax concession untouched, given there's concern about its effectiveness and integrity.
Well, there have been concerns expressed about it, and it's a complex area. We've looked at it very carefully, the Minister and I and our respective advisors, and Innovation and Science Australia will be reviewing it carefully with the industry. It has been refined over time, and it will be refined in the future.
When we see some of this industry discussion, when we see some of the details of it, I mean, as Laura was saying, the tax breaks for eligible businesses are going to be coordinated with industry, and the entrepreneur visas are going to be, eligibility will be determined with the sector. When we see some of the details about that, those discussions?
Well, James, there's a lot of detail in the fact sheets associated with this announcement today, but you might note that some of the measures you've talked about start on the 1st of July 2016. And we've consulted a great deal with the stakeholders in the sector, something that Karen Andrews as the Assistant Minister for Science, Wyatt Roy as the Assistant Minister for Innovation, and I, the Prime Minister, have been consulting for 10 weeks or more about these measures. And this is a day to be very optimistic and positive about what we have come up with in those consultations. And it's important for those consultations to continue right up to the time that these measures are implemented. Obviously, there will be detail around some of the tax measures in particular, the visa measures in particular, but there's a lot of detail in these packages. And I think the Australian public takeout from this is that the government has a plan and an agenda around jobs and growth in the innovation and science sector, about putting it at the centre. And they would expect us to go away now with the tax office and with the Department of Industry, Innovation and Science and implement these measures. Remember too, there's a whole of government approach to this. So we're changing governance. There's a new subcommittee of the Cabinet called Innovation Science, chaired by the Prime Minister. There'll be an interdepartmental committee because this area covers 9 different portfolios. There'll be a delivery unit within the Department of Industry, Innovation and Science to drive the agenda. And Innovation and Science Australia will have a chair as Bill Ferris. Alan Finkel, the Chief Scientist, will be the Deputy Chair of Innovation and Science Australia. They will have a role in evaluating, advising and reviewing the NISA. That's a pretty comprehensive way of making sure that we get everything right. As the Prime Minister says, we might make mistakes, and the public, I think, will accept that, rather than being too timid about making necessary changes to drive our economy.
Hang on, Mr. Andrew Brooks.
On the changes to insolvency laws,
yep.
It might encourage, to coin a phrase, some agility with the accountants of Australia. What is the ATO advice on this, and are they telling government that they perhaps need some more investment to ensure that some of the agility is not exposing the government to losses?
Okay, well, the changes we're proposing to insolvency laws to encourage entrepreneurship, innovation and business continuity and ensure that more people keep their jobs and that more businesses keep going rather than being shut down by secured creditors in a peremptory way. Those changes have been recommended by that innovative gang at the Productivity Commission. So this is not something that's quite as revolutionary as you imagine. In fact, it was I recommended or stated as the Coalition's policy in 2009. This has been a problem in Australia for a long time, particularly small and medium businesses will tell you this, that the way the insolvency laws have operated is that directors have had every incentive to, the minute there is a problem, to basically put in the administrators. And, that's essentially curtains, because in large part because there are what are called ipso facto clauses in contracts with suppliers and customers which say the contract is terminated if you go into receivership or administration. Now, the changes that we're proposing to adopt, and they're changes that have been recommended for a long time, and I've been talking about them for many years, the PC recommends them, what they will do is they will actually protect creditors, they'll protect shareholders. It takes us some way, but not all the way, to the American Chapter 11 system. It's got a very heavy involvement of the courts, which we generally don't want to be as legalistic or lawyeristic as the Americans. But this is a good change, and it's something that's been very carefully considered, as I said, over many years, and most lately by the Productivity Commission. Mark.
Mark Riley.
Assuming that a lot of this innovation is going to be underpinned by broadband services, how much of a drag on innovation is the $16 to $27 billion blowout in the cost of the NBN, the delays in the rollout, the slower upload speed that's going to downgrade revenues?
All of those three premises you've described are all regrettably untrue. So they're not. Look, I don't know whether you want to go into the NBN here, but let me just say to you that the NBN project was the single most reckless project of the former Labor governments. It was undertaken without any realistic idea of how long it would take to build or how much it would cost. We inherited it. This is one of the very rare occasions, very rare, where a bad project doesn't get worse and actually gets better. But it is rolling out much more rapidly than it would have done under the previous approach of Labor. It'll be finished 6 to 8 years sooner. It will cost about $30 billion less than it would under Labor. Those are not my numbers. That's the numbers from the management of the NBN Co. So I can assure you it's happening, and the speeds, both download and upload, are very high. And we're seeing very strong take-up. And last time I checked the rollout figures, and they're published every week, there's about 1.5 million premises that are able to connect to the NBN, and they are activating over 10,000 premises a week with that, that rollout rate, that activation rate increasing. It is the most complex infrastructure project ever undertaken in Australia. As you've heard me say before, we wouldn't be starting from there, but we inherited it, and we have turned it around. But it's still it'll be finished by roughly 2020. It'll be finally complete by 2020, but obviously millions of people will have access to it long before then. So most Australians will have access to it long before then. David, you're in.
Prime Minister, you mentioned the Productivity Commission. You're sitting on a report from the Productivity Commission on start-up business and exits. I think amongst other things that recommends that there's no serious funding constraints on small business. Do you agree with that conclusion, and are you going to put out a formal response to that PC report?
Well, we respond formally to all PC reports, but I can't. Look, David, I don't want to, give a one-line response to obviously a very detailed report. I'd say this generally about capital, in particular in the startup area, in the tech, mostly in the tech sector. There is plenty of money available. There's, as you've seen from the venture funds that have been raised. The shortage or the weakness is at the very early stage, and that's why we've provided some real incentives there. When a business gets to the point that it's raising, 20 or 50 million, $100 million, if it's got to that point, there is plenty of money here and elsewhere in the world for that matter. So really the part of there are many levers, there are many measures we have to adopt. But if we want to enjoy the ideas boom, if we want to be an innovation nation, then we have to make sure that we look very carefully at where there are weaknesses in the economy as it stands, in the market as it stands, and where we can provide a nudge, an incentive, a bit of encouragement to make the system work better. It's like a very big deal, which is the poor collaboration between research institutions, mostly universities, and business. Why is that? Why are we so much worse at it here than, say, in the UK or the United States, where the academic culture is very similar, business culture is very similar? And the fact is that the measures by which you get research grants are all based largely on the publish or perish approach, so that you're valued as a researcher by how often your latest piece of research is cited in other academic work. So what we are doing and with this is ensuring that one of the key criteria for securing support, getting that next research grant, is engaging with and cooperating with business and industry. And that's good for everybody. And it'll be good for the academics, it'll be good for industry. We have a very low ratio, if you like, of PhDs working in industry compared to very similar economies like, again, the US or the UK. This is one of the things that will change that. Bring business and research closer together. And the advantages of that are obvious. They can't just be operating in silos, not talking to each other. So these are all the nudges and changes and levers, incentives that we're undertaking. But this is all about unleashing the ideas boom. It's all about Australia becoming an innovation nation. There is a big cultural change afoot here. It's a mood of optimism, of entrepreneurship, of imagination, and that is what will drive our prosperity in the 21st century. And on that note, on that optimistic note, I will leave you to enjoy studying the package. Thanks very much.
Well done.
So that was Malcolm Turnbull, finishing as he began. Enthusiastic and typically, yes, optimistic about the future of Australian research and innovation to drive economic growth. Now, he was coming to you, and apologies for some technical problems earlier, but from the CSIRO's Discovery Centre here in the nation's capital, and he's been unveiling just under $1.1 billion worth of spending. Not all of it is technically new, but there is there more than $1 billion to generate predominantly business-led innovation and investment. One of the concerns the government had was that pure research and university-based research has tended to be disconnected from the business world. Want to get those partnerships happening. That's a big part of the package. Of us scrambled back from the CSIRO Discovery Centre, where there was an opportunity to read in on some of the details. It's not a big publication, this statement, running only to 16 pages, but it does contain, nevertheless, quite a bit of detail, particularly where business law intersects with tax law. That's a big part of this, and we're going to summarise it for you in a moment. Christopher Pyne, the Industry Minister, was also there. In a moment, we will be speaking to someone from the venture capital sector about what they make of it, because they squarely are a target of this innovation statement. The statement, by the way, is packaged with the slogan, "Welcome to the Ideas Boom." And the very first sentence in it comes directly from the Prime Minister's mouth. There has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian, is how it begins. So let's have a look now at some of the major initiatives contained in the statement. There's all up $106 million in tax incentives. Now, they break down into two areas significantly. One is for startup venture capital limited partnerships. Now, we, as I said, are going to speak to someone from that sector shortly, but in essence, one of the problems has been no one's been prepared to put their money in at the early stages of an idea here. Well, certainly not compared to the UK and the US. So they're offering tax breaks there, a 10% non-refundable tax offset, which will be attractive to some, is the general idea. And then also people who put their money in directly into a scheme, so not via one of these partnership funds, can also access other tax incentives, 20% non-refundable tax offset, and also a break on capital gains tax. If they keep their money in there for more than 3 years, there's a tax break on capital gains. So $106 million in that area, $75 million for the CSIRO's data research arm. That's called Data 61. It's a bit of a hothouse of ideas for coming up with new products, new ways to manage and sell data. So although it's a government-funded organisation, the idea is it'll try to link up with entrepreneurs and people with creative ideas to try and drive some growth there. There is $30 million going into what they're calling a cyber security growth centre. Now, the government spends about $5 billion a year on cyber security. As you might expect, it's turning an outward face onto the internet, so government activities will blossom there in the years ahead. They want to try and team up with industry, if not to create new products, then also to help train some of the people, because we hear constantly how undercooked Australia and many countries are when it comes to attracting bright people who can put up the defences on cyber security. And there's also a small, or relatively small investment of $15 million into what will become a fairly large investment fund. It's called the CSIRO Innovation Fund. That will grow in time to be worth $200 million in total. The idea being that companies will also put money into that CSIRO Innovation Fund, which then brings us on to another similar fund that they're going to set up to do with biomedical research. There's to be a $250 million biomedical translation fund, they're called. Now, the government contribution to that is reasonably small to start off with at about $10 million. But again, private companies are meant to co-invest to build that up to a $250 million investment fund. Translation, as it implies, is meant to translate their ideas into saleable products in biomedicine. There's a global innovation strategy as well. So for entrepreneurs in Australia who want to go out to some of the happening places like Silicon Valley, like Tel Aviv, some European and Asian destinations, including Germany, they'll be able to draw on money and assistance from the Australian government, including organisations like Austrade, to help them get started in those countries. These schemes are called landing pads in overseas countries. Insolvency laws will be relaxed. We heard the Prime Minister touch on that. So at present, if you go bankrupt in Australia, the default bankruptcy period that really puts you on the sidelines, you're not allowed to trade, is 3 years. That will be reduced to a default 1 year period. This is something that the Prime Minister himself has championed for many years, including when he first showed up in Parliament as a backbencher. And there's a general effort going into science, or what they call the STEM study of science, science, technology, engineering and mathematics. There will be an overall push in the schools and in the universities to try to get people more mathematically literate, more digital literate, and also a small parcel of money, or relatively small, to try and attract more women and girls into those STEM study areas. So that's it in a nutshell. Now, as we indicated before that summary, one of the big focuses, particularly for the tax incentive side of this, are venture capital firms. really driven growth in Silicon Valley, and they're starting to take off in Australia too. Now, Yasser El Ansari is with us in the studio. Yasser represents the Private Equity and Venture Capital Association. So there's a bit to get through, but a lot of it is targeted, Yasser El Ansari, at your organisation and members that you have. What's the overall takeout before we get down into some nitty-gritty detail?
Well, Greg, this is really positive. This is a great first step, and it is a first step. There's plenty of work still to do on this, but we have some catching up to do, and pleasingly today, the government is laying down a blueprint for where we see ourselves heading in the next few years. It's really important that we embrace this change. We need to embrace disruption. We need to embrace our innovative potential, not just at a very early stage in our market. Startup businesses play a critically important role, but also embracing change right across the spectrum. We need medium-sized businesses, we need family businesses, and we need large listed businesses to embrace change, to embrace innovation in the same way. This statement helps us get a little bit closer to that ideal.
All right, just take us back to the sorts of funds and members that you represent. What do they do? If I've got $50,000, $200,000 and I come along to companies that you're associated with, what do you enable in this innovation space?
So venture capital funds typically play a role in investing capital at generally a riskier point in time in the evolution of a business's life cycle. Early on, of course, businesses go through the phase where they generate an idea, ideation, if you want to describe it as that. They then want to develop, test the market for that idea, and commercialise ultimately that idea. Investing capital at that very early stage is critically important. That allows them to undertake the research, to do the market testing that they need to devise the best product and the best solution.
And this has been lagging in Australia relative to other countries, has it?
Absolutely. We've been way behind the curve here, and we've got some catching up to do. The really pleasing thing is that we have runs on the board. We know that we can create world-class businesses. We know that we can generate some of the world's best businesses here in Australia and keep them here. We have to do a much better job of broadening that horizon though, and ensuring we have plenty more businesses coming through that pipeline that we keep here in Australia.
All right, so if I've got that parcel of money to invest, I now see that the government's offering tax breaks in the form of a 10% non-refundable tax offset. They've also, if I keep my money in there long enough, I can get some attractive capital gains treatment. How much is that going to drive extra risk-taking, extra investment by people like me with this parcel of money?
Well, I think it will play a really important role. Like all areas of policy, though, Greg, it can't be done in isolation. What we have to do here in Australia is embrace risk. We are very risk averse. We're happy to gamble money on horse races and sporting competitions, but we're not prepared to back our own businesses as much as other countries like the US have been. And that's an area we have to work on, giving people tax breaks to correct for a market failure, and that's effectively what happens here. People avoid risk. That creates a market failure. We have to correct that imbalance. Tax breaks will help us get there.
So what the government's saying is you might still accrue some losses. That's part of the game when you're in this sector, but if you hold on longer, the odds of success improve, do they?
Correct, they improve, and importantly, if you want to commit to a longer time period of investment, this isn't about investing shares on the listed equity market where the average hold period for that might only be a couple of years. This is about investing for longer term, 3 years, 5 years, even 10 years out. What the government is saying is they want to incentivise and encourage that by giving people a capital gains tax exemption for that longer time horizon, and that's really important.
And what about insolvency? We touched in our summary on the shortening of the bankruptcy period. What's your own experience with the current system and the way in which it might hold people back from taking risk?
Well, this is another component of recalibrating our appetite for risk here in Australia. Here in Australia, if you have a go at setting up a business, if you back yourself, back your idea, and you happen to fail through a variety of circumstances, you're penalised for that. You're put on the sidelines. I think you described it earlier, and that's exactly what happens. You are banished from the market. What we have to do is embrace those people, because clearly, if you've had a go at something, if you've attempted to run a business and you've not succeeded, those people tend to have learnt some very valuable lessons, and so when they come back to the market, with the next idea, we should be embracing and supporting that culture rather than looking to put them on the sidelines.
What do you assess as the available pool of money that might start to flow from announcements like this today? I think there was a study cited in today's statement that 4,500 startups in Australia couldn't get the money they wanted. Do you think it's going to unleash a torrent of investment?
Well, I think it will help. Let's be realistic about this. These are small steps to get us towards the longer term ambitions, and it's important that we put that context into play. I think this will clearly help more startup businesses to get up off the ground. The real asset test for us will be over the coming year, the coming 2 or 3 years, is to assess whether or not we're doing a good enough job, not just of incentivising new startups, but ensuring that we can keep those high growth potential startups here in Australia. We don't want to lose them to markets like the US. We don't want them to relocate, take their ideas and to take those employment opportunities offshore. We want to keep them here.
In that sense, I suppose, is there a negative in that global outreach, I think it was called Global Innovation Fund we touched on in the summary, which would support an Australian entrepreneur who wanted to go to Tel Aviv, to Silicon Valley? Is that a negative?
Look, let's understand the marketplace here as well. This is a global market. We have to ensure that we create our best platforms to support Australian businesses to relocate, to test markets offshore, but ultimately we want to keep as many of those businesses here as possible. Not to say we're going to keep all of them here, and we shouldn't keep all of them here, because there are some markets abroad like the US where it is clearly much better suited to particular types of businesses who want to tap into new opportunities. But what we have to improve is our capacity to keep the lion's share of our best entrepreneurs and our best business ideas here. That's where the economic payoff to the nation comes from. That's where new job opportunities will emerge for the next generation of Australians.
All right. Well, Yasser El-Ansari, stay with us. A couple more questions to ask Yasser in a moment in relation to the sorts of things that Australia might try to invest in if and when a lot of this passes through into the system. But first of all, just to recap on the nature of the Prime Minister's pitch, it is very much about encouraging people to take some risk, put money in and have a go.
The more high quality, effective, productive, enterprising entrepreneurs we can attract, the better. Because they drive jobs. They will create, entrepreneurs create jobs. Any new business. I mean, this is why we're doing so much to encourage new businesses, whether it's through the entrepreneurs visa or by reason of the very generous tax offsets and capital gains tax exemptions for investing in early stage ventures. Very, very substantial incentives, because one of the things we've learnt whether from life's experience or from the experience in other countries, as I was saying earlier, that even if if you start a new venture, a new business, and let's say it goes well for a while and then for whatever reason it doesn't succeed, you may have lost some money, your investors may have lost some money, but the overall economy massively benefits. Because you're wiser, your employees are wiser, your investors are wiser, everyone's learnt something, and the ecosystem benefits. That's why cultural change is so important. We've got to be prepared to have a go and be more prepared to embrace risk and experimentation. And it goes with this package too. Can I tell you? Every change that we make here, every step that we take with this, we are going to examine in the future and see how it's performed. And those things that do well, we'll do more of. And those things that do not do so well, we'll do less of, and we may do something else. This is not a one-off announcement. This is not the first and last word of this government on innovation. This is an absolutely critical theme of our administration, to ensure that we are always driving innovation, because I promise you that is the future. That is our future. It's the future for our jobs and ours, our children, our grandchildren. Innovation is a big cultural measure. It's something that we need to be better at in Australia and right across the board. And there's a lot of levers being pulled here, but there may well be more to come. There will be more to come, I have no doubt.
There you go. So not a one-off, says the Prime Minister, in relation to his innovation statement, as we indicated at the outset. 16 pages in its current form, but the Prime Minister obviously indicating that there'll be more chapters, more additions in the months and years to come. Well, we still have Yasser El-Ansari with us. He's from the Private Equity and Venture Capital Association. Just as we start to wrap up, yes, it's probably fair to say that a lot of Australians have a greater understanding about the types of innovation and entrepreneurial activities happening in Tel Aviv or in Silicon Valley than what's happening in Australia. Can you give anyone some insights into what is most being pursued in Australia? Is it technology-related stuff? Is it biomedicine? Where's the smart money going?
Well, a little bit of both, Greg. You've touched on effectively the two most important sectors within our innovation ecosystem. Yes, high-tech, high digitally focused businesses are clearly right at the heart of what's happening right around the world at the moment. And we have great capability there. We have great businesses that have been born here in Australia, and we've managed to keep some of them here. One of the biggest operating in this space is Atlassian, which is about to list in the US at a reported valuation in excess of $3 billion. Testament yet again, if we needed further proof about our capability. Biotechnology, bioscience, biomedicine are really important strengths for our economy. We know that we can develop world-class technology in that area. We know that we can cure some of the most significant and problematic illnesses right across our community and across global communities. We've done that before. We've done that with companies like Cochlear and other companies that have developed world-class treatment programs for a number of common ailments. We can do it again. We just have to continue to invest in those sectors of our economy.
And so is an indigenous Facebook or Uber possible to be grown in Australia?
Absolutely. Anything's possible here. That's the great thing, is we have a generation of Australians coming through, and we have the current generation of working Australians who are full of great ideas. What we have to do is embrace that opportunity, ensure that we've got the depth of capital that we need to support the investment of those businesses, and that's critically important for our future. And if we can do that, I see great potential for us here in Australia. And as the Prime Minister and the Minister for Industry are saying this morning, we have an ideas boom. I think it's a really exciting time here in Australia.
All right. Yasser El-Ansari from the Private Equity and Venture Capital Association. Thanks for your thoughts on the package. Only just out, but we do appreciate your quick response. That's the view from the investor side of the field. We're also going to talk very shortly to the Chief Scientist, Ian Chubb, to check his readout on it as well. But just as we prepare to hear from him, we might again just go back to the man who launched all of this, Malcolm Turnbull, again reiterating that he will be, as he says, flexible, agile and nimble, adjusting these policies if in fact they don't work.
You know something? There are risks for everybody, and we've got to be prepared to take risks. And that is why one of the aspects of the political paradigm I'm seeking to change is the old politics where politicians felt that they had to guarantee that every policy would work. They had to sort of water everything down so there was no element of risk. Let me tell you, I'm not guaranteeing that all of these policies will be as successful as we hope they will be. I'm very confident about it because we've worked very hard on it. We've had a great team. We've had a lot of good collaboration. But, you know, if some of these policies are not as successful as we like, we will change them and we will learn from them, because that is what a 21st century government has got to be. It has got to be as agile as the start-up business seeks to inspire.
This package is not just about trying to get people to invest their money in startups and would-be success stories. There's also a strong emphasis on universities and in building collaboration, or linkages as they call them, between research organisations and business. That's something that the Chief Scientist, Ian Chubb, has kept an eye on throughout his term in that office. It only has less than a couple of months to run, but he's with us now. Ian Chubb, thanks for joining us. Give us a general response, first of all, before we get into detailed questions. What do you think of the package?
I think it's pretty good, really. There's nothing in there that I can disagree with. So that's a landmark time.
And a feature, I noticed there's the Translation Fund for Biomedicine, there's the CSIRO Innovation Fund as well. They have some big dollars around them at 250 million and 200 million respectively. Are they jewels in the crown? Or?
Oh, they're very important. For me, the jewel in the crown is the Cabinet Committee for Innovation and Science.
Why's that?
Well, it's never been there before. It's never been that close to the centre of government. And
what difference will that make?
Well, I think in Australia over decades now we've split our support for science, innovation, research development over 10 or 11 portfolios, multiple programs, more than 100 programs. And you lose coherence when that happens because each minister, each bureaucrat, whatever wants to make their mark. So to have a whole of government that close to government, I think is really critically important.
And so that's going to sit, as we understand it, in the core of government. It is a cabinet subcommittee. I think the Prime Minister himself has made sure that he has oversight of it as well. Who else might be on it, or who else would you look to want to include on it?
Well, I think that the plan is that all of the ministers with any involvement in innovation and science will be on it, so there's half a dozen of them at least. Obviously it'll be supported by key bureaucrats. It'll be advised by the Innovation Science and Australia Board, which I've also been arguing for a long time because, you know, if you learn from what other countries have done, then you bring coherence to your programs. You don't just think that 1,000 flowers will yield the red roses that you're after. You make sure you plant seeds for red roses.
What will be the measure of success for this and by when, let's say in 3 to 5 years' time? What difference do you think any of this might measurably make?
I think that we should by then be seeing a shift in the number of startups that are high growth, that endure, that stay in Australia, that there's an increased investment in those startups, whether that be in biotechnology or the digital section of the economy. I think that we should begin to see a different way in which the science subjects and mathematics are taught in our schools, and that we become an increasingly science literate nation when we have to make the big judgment calls in the future that we're going to have to make.
And that is an emphasis. It's sort of in the end of the document really, but there's dozens of millions of dollars there as you add it up, 14 here and 20 there. What's that going to look like? Is it better teachers who enthuse students at the high school years to go on at years 11 and 12 and university? How does that work?
Better supported teachers. I think we've been negligent as a nation in the way we've supported our teachers, and indeed the way we regard teaching as a sort of, something you do rather than a professional career. And we need to support them better. We would inspire our students. We don't want them all to be scientists, but we want them all to understand how central science is to the future. And we want them to be able to make a judgment call when they vote that's based on a bit of thinking rather than visceral.
Might market forces do the heavy work for you in that respect? It's not going to be too hard to imagine that for a young person now they can look at the dollars that attach to some of the careers in these technology sectors and pretty much decide of their own volition that's where they need to be?
Well, they do, and I think that is an element, but I don't think it's the single driver. If we do what we should do, and that's learn from what other countries do, then I can't think of a country that we would compare and contrast ourselves with where the government is not in there driving change. So they don't just presume that they can get a headline and a 3-inch column or a few minutes on your TV news and say, this is what should happen and it will happen. They're in there driving and they're relentless in driving. They've been driving for decades in America.
That's true of the US because there's a popular perception that this was just freewheeling capitalism and entrepreneurship happening in Silicon Valley. You're saying that's far from the case?
Well, the American government is arguably the largest venture capital funder in the world. They put money into small to medium enterprises in particular, but not only. And they've been doing it for 25 years. It's survived multiple presidents, multiple Congresses. It's been so successful, they're now increasing their effort into that program. And it drives change. They estimate that they get 7 patents a day 7 patents a day over 25 years on average. That's a lot more.
Good return on investment. Now, today's paper is invariably going to generate some discussion, I imagine, in the university sector, and you came from there, about the balance between the pursuit of pure research and that which links into business and eventually commercial return. Is that a legitimate concern, and does this land too heavily in favour of broadly defined commercialisation?
So I think it's a legitimate concern. I think that at the end of the day, nearly everything that gets commercialised is built off an idea. The idea comes from knowledge. You generate the knowledge sometimes for a specific purpose, but as often as not, you're doing it because there is something that is completely unknown and scientists are working away to try to understand it better. They put the knowledge out there and it can get picked up by somebody else and used. So I think it's very important that we do that. But the balance has probably been too far the other way. So whilst I think, and I certainly don't blame the universities, I think universities are often soft target in this. You know, you can sort of give them a hit and they buckle a bit and then, you know, stand up again. Business has got to step up to the plate too. The fact that we have the lowest rate of cooperation between researchers and business in the OECD by a large margin is, again, an indictment of past culture.
Does this package change that? Does this put the weights on business in any way to step up to the plate?
I think it does that as well. And I think that, as the Prime Minister said in an interview with you and at a conference that I was just at with him, that, you know, if it's not working or not working well enough, they'll change it. And I think that's the perfect position. You know, if the best laid plans might not, in practice, yield the outcomes that you want. So they're going to review it, change it, make it better.
You don't see anything derisory in the Prime Minister saying universities have this still a publish or perish mentality, seeming to suggest that the pure research side perhaps has received too much focus in the past?
Well, it's true, by and large. I mean, of course, there are great examples of where that's not true. But when you generalise, what you would say is that it's true. Should that still be the case? No, it should not. You know, a few months ago there was a paper produced by Nature that showed that there have been 58 million articles published since 1900. Of those, something like 28 million had never been cited. In the past, an Australian university would get the same number of dollars in the bottom 28 million as it would for one in the top 1,000. And I think that's a bit silly, a bit old-fashioned. So the university should be publishing, their great scholars should be publishing great research in great journals. But there are a whole lot of people who could also be doing something that's much more at the application then. And the government has selected some national research priorities. They're published, they were released last week. They picked their growth centres. They're providing some focus, and the universities can get behind that without feeling unduly imposed upon.
All right, and Ian Chubb, just because the Prime Minister's made it abundantly clear that this is the first instalment, there'd be more to come. He'd be open to junking some, picking up new things. What is left unaddressed, or what should come next, in your opinion?
Well, I think probably the work in progress that's still in there is the adequate provision for infrastructure for scientific research. Now, what they've done in there is they've taken it away from the Band-Aid mechanisms of the past few years, and they've made it continuing funding.
That's the reference to about $500 million of what they call critical national research infrastructure.
Over the forwards. And we, I was part of a working group that provided some advice to the government, which recommended a substantially larger sum than that per annum.
How much?
I can't really remember now, but related to the R&D budget. And around about 8% of the R&D budget was the figure we were talking about. So there's a fair way to go. I couldn't expect really that a government would just pick that up overnight and say, yes, we'll do that. But what they are doing is that they're now doing a review of our research infrastructure. My successor as Chief Scientist will run that program. But it probably needs more than there is in there now. but the path is out there for them to get more when they see what's actually required.
All right. Well, Ian Chubb, Chief Scientist, thanks for your thoughts on this innovation statement today.
Thanks, Greg.
And there may well be some more to come. According to the Prime Minister, this will evolve and he will adapt over time along with his government. Now, we do intend to bring you more on the innovation statement, certainly within the next half an hour or so. But just to indicate that Bill Shorten, the opposition leader, is also due to hold a media conference very soon. That's scheduled for about a minute from now, but experience tells us these things rarely start on time. We will look to Bill Shorten for some sort of response to the innovation statement, remembering that he already has several instalments out there in Labor Party policy. One was slipped in as late as Friday, just getting in ahead of the government with some ideas which, it must be said, are very similar to the government. So I don't imagine Bill Shorten will necessarily be thundering about large elements of this. He had released policies of his own, which are very similar to many of them. Just as we wait for that, there's probably enough time to go to another matter of the day. The Treasurer, Scott Morrison, says Ian Macfarlane's defection to the Nationals won't automatically trigger a front bench reshuffle. Mr Macfarlane seeking approval from the LNP state executive in Queensland to move, as we all know by now, from the Liberal to the Nationals party room. Nationals MPs say this would entitle the party to another ministerial position. Mr Macfarlane has appeared alongside the Nationals leader Warren Truss at a media event in Toowoomba today, minus the Prime Minister, who's in Canberra, of course. We'll hear what they've had to say soon, but first, here's Scott Morrison when he spoke on Macquarie Radio.
The way this works is the LNP is one party. Yep. All right? There's no two parties. Ian Macfarlane won't have to change one corflute at the next election if this happens, because he's got LNP on there at the last election. He'll have LNP on it at the next election. And they can decide out of Queensland which party room they sit in, the National Party room with Warren Truss or the Liberal Party room with Malcolm Turnbull. And that's all worked out through their local pre-selections. Now, when Ian went to pre-selection last time, which was just a couple of weeks ago, not that long ago, he said he was going to sit in the Liberal Party room. So that is now what is going to be reviewed by their state executive, and it's not a fait accompli, and they can decide to do whichever they like. The other point I make about it is this, Ray, because there's been issues around the ministerial composition. If there's a change in the number of Nationals or Liberals in the coalition party room, that doesn't automatically trigger a change in the ministry. It'd be like if there was a by-election. Let's say there was 5 by-elections this weekend and there were more Libs or less Libs or more Nats and less Libs, there'd be no requirement to change the ministry. Because what the coalition agreement says is that when there is a reshuffle, that is when the leader decides to do one, or when there's an election, then you have to take account of the proportions of the two parties. So what this does is doesn't change anything. There is no trigger event for any reshuffle at all. The LNP state executive still has to decide whether they're going to accept this. But at the end of the day, we're all on the same bus. Ian Macfarlane's decided to change from one seat on one side of the bus to the other side of the bus, but we're all on the same bus and we're all heading in the same direction. And if you vote for Ian Macfarlane at the next election, Malcolm Turnbull remains Prime Minister.
As the previous Science Minister, I fully understand why Malcolm Turnbull can't be here today. He's in the process of announcing a $1 billion innovation project, and whilst this project is very important to the local community, innovation is what is going to make industry in Australia more competitive. It's part of a program that was begun when I was the Minister for Science. Today is a red letter day for the industry and innovation portfolio, and I'm sure it's going to make a huge difference to the Australian economy. Malcolm and I are good mates, and we still speak pretty regularly, I have to say. Issues in relation to those matters will be dealt with by the LNP over the next week, and I'll make further comments after that date. I have nothing further to add.
Well, I think it would have been great if the Prime Minister and the Premier could have been here. They are both very busy people. I'd remind you that the date of this event was actually set by Tony Abbott when he was Prime Minister, and so obviously the Prime Minister has a different program and was not able to accommodate it. Ian has rightly made the point that it's a significant day for the government with the announcement of the innovation package. It's a package that we hope will transform Australia's approach to science and to industry, that will want us to look more towards being an innovative country that can use our skills skills and our talents to build a new economy for our country. So what he's doing is very, very important for our country. The coalition has always had to work through issues, difficult issues. We've been separate parties in other states, and as a result, therefore, we have had a different approach